Patrick Pitch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
James Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
My friends, that man is exactly who we're talking about today. Nat Fyfe, the captain of the Fremantle Footy Club, reigning Brownlow medalist, and to be honest, an absolute ripping human being as well. Nat Fyfe is number 16 in the 50 most relevant. To talk about this Fremantle Docker, I got Jimmy on. Hello, mate.
Hello, MJ. Hello, listeners.
I made you suffer through a couple of bombers just a few days ago, but now that we're getting into the teens, and really the latter part of the teens is just about to happen, we are talking about the most relevant players, really, across all salary cap formats of the game, and Nat Fyfe, oh my word, is one of the most relevant midfielders we can talk about. Starting to get towards the end of his career, though, but very much still right in the prime. 28 years old. This midfielder had another really strong showing last year, topped off with that Brownlow Medal. 133 was his best score in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team last year against the Carlton Footy Club, while in SuperCoach, 154 against the Hawks. In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, one of his better seasonal averages. In fact, a career best, 104.9, and in SuperCoach, 119.9. The third time he's cracked over that 119 barrier. In SuperCoach, he is going to set you back around about 650k. In AFL Fantasy, just shy of 780. And in AFL Dream Team, just shy of $760,000. It's kind of phenomenal, Jimmy, when we think about Nat Fyfe, two-time Brownlow medalist. Before we even look any more into the details and the data of what he's been able to do in football sense and in a fantasy sense, he is now going to be one of the all-time greats of the AFL ever. It is rarefied air. You pick up a best and fairest in the league twice.
It's not a bad effort, is it? It's and especially playing for a team as he has over the last little while that hasn't experienced a whole lot of success. He's been a rare shining light for him.
And you're right, it is. You know, Gary Abbott's probably one of the only other players most recently that's won a Brownlow medal when he was playing at Gold Coast in a relatively poor performing team. But Nat Fyfe was able to put that Fremantle Dockers midfield, in fact, the entire team on his back. He did it without Lachie Neale, who's really been one of his key supporters through that midfield unit. And he carried his team to almost 10 wins last year. He's just a phenomenal footballer, is Nat Fyfe. Last year, right across the league, he ended up being third for contested possessions, sixth for clearances, 10th for total disposals. To keep looking into some of those the stats, it was actually 30 possessions that he was averaging a game last year, 18 of them contested. Went pretty reasonable disposal efficiency considering how much of contested ball he was winning. 70%, 6 score involvements, 8 clearances on average a game, and 5 inside 50s. Could you imagine what he would be like in a side where you had some additional support and some forwards that would stay on the park and clunk the ball? My word.
Oh, mate. You can imagine. And I mean, and that shows too, in his Brownlow speech, he thanked midfielders of the calibre of Darcy Tucker and Reece Conker for the support in the midfield they gave him last year. And I think that says volumes about where that club's at, where his midfield is at. But he's still producing those sort of stats and figures and performances despite that. And really, I think, tell me something I don't know, MJ. You've told me for the last few minutes, Nat Fyfe is pretty good at football. I think we know that.
Okay.
Why am I picking him in SuperCoach?
It's not just SuperCoach you're considering, but that's certainly the format that he's at his strongest.
Let's start with that one. Yeah.
20 games last year, so really good numbers there. 17 tons last year. That's
17 out of 20?
Not bad. Out of those hundreds,
not bad.
12 were over 120. Now we're talking ahead into guys. Okay, 120. We're starting to go. That I could keep that as a captaincy score. Of those,
absolutely, and he's averaging 120 with a high score of 150 odd.
Yeah,
that's huge consistency at that 120 mark too.
And then of those tons, he had 6 over 140. That's not
very nice.
bad. Like, that's not bad. To be able to convert 12 of your 17 tons into 120 plus, like, that's enough as a captaincy option. I know we always want more as a fantasy footy community, but when you're playing the rolling lockouts, let's be honest, even in SuperCoach, you got your captain, your vice captain gets that 120, 121. It takes a little bit of courage sometimes to be able to go, no, I'm going to put that captaincy on another option. So 12 at 120 is great. 6 of those into 140s, my word, he's good. And just the 3 scores below 100 all year.
Yeah, it's not bad. And as you spoke of that rolling lockout, the other handy thing with Fyfe is that more often than not, he plays on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Which means that if your vice captain hasn't worked, he's not a bad little card to have up your sleeve as a backup captain if you need it.
No, he's certainly pretty handy. That is no mistake about that. In Dream Team and AFL Fantasy, not as prestigious in terms of his high averages, but still a best ever career year through that format. 20 games, 14 tons. Gone is that myth that he can't get a ton in AFL Fantasy. Not bad, 14 out of 20. And, again, the myth in the AFL Fantasy and Dream Team community is, okay, when he does get tons, he doesn't get big ones. Well, half of them were over 120 last year. Not bad, and he went under 75 just twice with a seasonal average of 104. Again, doing it in a side where he was carrying an entire midfield on his back.
Yeah, it's the thing with him, isn't it? And I mean, he's not, as you say, he's dispelled that myth that he can't get hundreds and he can't score decent hundreds for that matter. He doesn't have quite the same ceiling in Dream Team as he does in SuperCoach.
No,
they reward his style of play a lot better in that format. But even so, if you can lock him away knowing you're getting a pretty solid 105 or more possibly throughout the year from him, that's not a bad thing. He can hurt you a little bit. Yep. Those low scores that he does get on the odd occasion when he gets them, especially in Dream Team, are awfully frustrating. But he's more than likely than not to make up for it the week after. Yeah, no, that's certainly true. Because he does win so much of his ball in and around the contest, an elite overhead mark when he is required to do so, which is most of the time as well for Fremantle. But it is because he's not as heavily rewarded through contested possession, which he's so phenomenal at. Yes, he lends himself more to SuperCoach, and that's where he's a ceiling, that where he is a week in, week out captaincy option. And we did see a couple of times teams send a tagger to him. We saw Carlton send Ed Curnow to him late in the year. That, didn't really work, considering he got a 147 in SuperCoach, 133 in Dream Team and Fantasy the week earlier. Harms shut him down. I was going to mention, it's the players I noticed that shut him down are the players that, given a bit of time and experience and ambition, would want to be like Nat Fyfe, I think. They're that big-bodied, harder insider types. The James Harms, the Jack Steele, I think, got a hold of him at one point before he got injured a little bit. And, they're the types that, can have a bit more of an impact on him if they sacrifice their game to just body him out of the way. And you see a lot of free kicks paid both ways in those sort of contests, which sometimes works against him as well. But, that's the type that can get to him sometimes. But as you said, it doesn't always work because Fyfe is that type of bull that when he's in the mind for it, no one's really going to stop him.
No, he's not.
Talk to me about his body, MJ. Not in any sort of
admiring way?
Distasteful kind of way, yes. From an injury point of view, he played 20 out of 22 last year. It's been one of those things with Fyfe where people have thought that ongoing injury concern is an issue for him because he did miss a few games in previous seasons. Where do you stand with him on that one?
Well, I think that's the only real compelling case you can create for why you're choosing to pass on Nat Fyfe, and it's around the durability, especially in SuperCoach. In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, if you said to me, look, yes, I know he can get tons, I know he can get 120-plus scores, but I just don't think he's got the frequency there enough. Fine, I'll hear your argument out. Durability for me is the reason in any format you're talking not starting or trading in Nat Fyfe. And I think it's certainly a concern or a factor. 20 games, 15 games, 21 games is his past 3 seasons. And then you go before that, you got to go back to 2011 since he played 20 games or more. But it's rare that he's not pushing around that 20-game marker. Only twice has he not gone anywhere near that since 2013. And so his durability, yes, it's not elite. He's not Lachie Neale, who doesn't miss games, but it's also not as disastrous as sometimes we can make it out to be. And I'm keen on your take. Like, would you take, again, let's purely drill down on SuperCoach. Would you take a guy that you know is capable of averaging 120 for 17, 18, 19, 20 weeks a year maybe? Let's limit him at 20. Yep. Would you take that over a guy that you know can go 105, gosh, even a 110, but do that for 22 weeks?
Oh, look, I think in SuperCoach that higher score, that higher frequency of ceiling, and that regularity with which he does pump out those 120 plus scores makes him worth the risk a lot more so than it does in the other formats. In a dream team where he's one of many that average around that 105 mark, that occasionally will go big, but not perhaps as big as some others, then I think when you look at that injury factor as another argument against him compared to other players who have got a better history of durability, then yeah, I'll buy that excuse a lot more. In SuperCoach, though, I think when you've got that potential for those scores that often, and when he's come off the back of a year as good as anyone, and again in which he's played 20 out of 22 with no real concerns over his physique, then it's hard to pass on him in that format.
Oh, and remember, through the preseason, he had elbow surgery, through the ill-fated AFL-X game, he wasn't able to really do anything through that. So again, he was coming off a very limited preseason to some regards through that. I agree. When it comes to Nat Fyfe, fantasy, he's relevant because he's shown he can go on scoring runs and be a really, really nice option for us. Just looking at last year, from round 17, he went 128, 113, 104, 121. Just in, again, I know it's only 5 weeks of data, but it shows he can do it and put those hundreds together. In SuperCoach, there is risk associated with him, but it's a risk in both ways. The risk is you choose to start him and it'll cost you a trade because somewhere potentially down the line, something will happen to his body and you're forced to trade or hold him for 2 to 3 weeks and play a cash cow. That's one risk. The risk on the other side is you go against him because he might get injured, but he's one of the few premium midfielders in that format we have that if you don't own them, he can take a season away from you in a month.
That's it, very, very quickly. And when we look at the numbers now, it's still pretty early days, first week of February and all, but he's currently owned in about 40% of teams in SuperCoach, so that's a lot of coaches you're up against who have got him if you don't.
It's not a worrying sign, but it's certainly an interesting one. You look at those top-level SuperCoach premiums, 30% own Jack McRae, 26% own Lachie Neale. That 40% you've talked about with Nat Fyfe. These are all, maybe we'll see McRae, maybe, in the 50 most relevant. Dunkley's up at 17%. Cripps is over 50% in terms of his ownership. Dangerfield, wonder if we'll see him in the 50 most relevant at 30. Josh Kelly, probably the most lowly owned of all of them, at 10%. We're talking about the guys that have got the top averages in SuperCoach last year. He's not got the highest ownership of those boys. He's up there, but gosh,
he's up there. But
him and Cripps.
There's a few betting against him at the minute, and I don't mind that.
Yeah, it's not unique. Let's to go against him, but gosh, there's risk either side, and I think it's which risk do you feel more comfortable taking? Because you're either risking knowing that you might have to trade him out, or you're risking that you're going to go against him, and it's not like he doesn't have the history of braining it.
No, exactly right. Exactly right. Where do you take him in the draft, MJ?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I think in SuperCoach, he's a lock M1. Inside no question. What happens inside those first 5 picks of a SuperCoach draft fascinates me. With the news, the injury news around Max Gawn, that might temper some people because he was probably a top 5 pick in a SuperCoach draft. Lachie Whitfield, I think, was and is, as is a Brodie Grundy. I do see a world where if I've got a late first-round pick, like I'm talking pick 8, 9, or 10, I can see a world in SuperCoach where Fyfe is still there. People will choose the durability of a McRae or a Neale. They'll see Dangerfield and go, oh, that's value, I'm going to jump on him. I
The
can see it well.
Dunkley.
Yeah, the hype of Dunkley. I can see a world and go, gosh, I've got to get a forward, so I'll go and get Dusty too. I see a world where he's becomes a late first-round selection, but you'll get the value of a top 3 pick.
Yeah. Yep, I can't argue with that. That's not a bad situation to find yourself in that sort of format. In a dream team or fantasy ultimate footy type of draft, though, I think he goes a fair bit later, just quietly.
Okay, when we say fair bit later, are we talking another round or another 2 or 3?
For me, I'd be thinking a third round is about the time I'd be comfortable to take him.
Yep.
I wouldn't want him as my M1 in fantasy or dream team.
Nope.
Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with him, but I think again, when there's quite a number of midfielders that average around that 105 sort of mark, that perhaps have a couple less question marks over him. As good as an absolute gun player he is, and I don't mean to detract from that at all.
Not at all.
In that sort of a format, there are probably a number of other mids I'd be more comfortable taking in the first and even the second round, and that's notwithstanding, potentially the opportunity to take. A Lloyd or a Grundy or a Dusty or whoever else on any of the other lines somewhere in between. So that, I think he's, a third, maybe even nudging slightly into the fourth potentially.
Yeah, on the turn, perhaps. Is there a world where you'd be happy to take him as your M1, knowing, not because you're picking him in the opening couple, 2 rounds, but is there a world where you go, I'm going to lock away Dusty, I'm going to lock away a Rory Laird in your second, I don't know, maybe that's not the way you'd choose to draft, but just picking names for name's sake. You're going to lock away a ruck or a forward and a defender. You're going to get 2 of those 3, and then you're entering into the third round, and you're starting to see guys like Clayton Oliver and Mitch Duncan and Stephen Cornelio go off the board. Is that where you go, yep, I'm happy to have Fyfe as an M1, or in no circumstance would you do that?
No, it does. At that point, if you've been able to find top-level opportunities in the other lines first, to the point where it's become worthwhile neglecting your midfield for those first couple of rounds, then sure, why not? It's not to say that he can't be your M1, not to contradict myself by too much, but I wouldn't want to be picking him in the first 3 rounds as my M1. If it's M1, it's at the start of the 4th, and that's because I've found excellent opportunities elsewhere. Yeah. For whatever reason.
Yeah, look, I think I agree.
And for other names to throw into that equation, if that's where potentially you've taken a Grundy in round 1 as your first or second pick, or Whitfield perhaps. On the turn, people have been scared off a Gawn or maybe Toby Green sitting there at that point on the at the end of the second round, and in the third, then you've gone and taken I don't know who's sitting around that point of mark. Maybe Hooley at the back there.
Sicily, maybe.
You're rounding up with 3 players that are all very capable of averaging around that 100 sort of mark on those other lines, which arguably is more valuable than a 105-point midfielder.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, I agree. I think any earlier than the third round in a Dream Team and fantasy draft, you're just reaching for him, and you don't have to do that. If he slipped to the 4th round, man, you'd start to feel like coaches might be overvaluing forwards at that point if you're able to get him in the 4th round, but you would take it.
And it really just depends on who else is on the table at that sort of time, in that sort of format. There's a lot of players priced at about the same mark that he is, for want of a better way of putting things, or that you could foreseeably see average around that same sort of mark. Yeah. And in a Dream Team sort of format, as you say, you've got players like Lockie Neal and Cornelio, who I think both will go before him, despite averaging less.
Yep, no, fair enough too.
Yeah, Pendles as well.
Yeah, Pendles is also in that marker, as is the Bonto. Mate, appreciate your thoughts today as we talked about the number 16 player in the 50 most relevant, Nat Fyfe.
No worries, mate. Good fun.
If you want to go and check out the article on him, you can go and do that now at coachespanel.tv. All the links for all the other players revealed in the 50 most relevant. You can go back and check them out. If you are loving these podcasts, make sure if you haven't already, subscribe and follow to them via wherever you choose to get your podcast from, and leave a 5-star rating and review. Tomorrow, I'm getting the Phantom back. Yep, from the advertiser, from the Phantom's lair. Yep, his podcast, he's back. Who will it be tomorrow at number 15? I'll tell you in like 24 hours.